Update 2. My neighbor keeps leaving her kids in my yard and expects me to babysit her kids every day because I work from home. So I called CPS. She was shocked at what I did when they arrived. 2 days later, they showed up. I was working when I saw their car pull into Dana's driveway. I did not eavesdrop, but I saw her come outside, arms folded, expression unreadable. She spoke to them for a while. I saw one of the agents kneel down to talk to the kids. They stayed for nearly an hour. When they finally left, I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. But the peace did not last long. Maybe 10 minutes later, Dana stormed into my yard like a tornado. She was furious, red-faced, shouting. She screamed at me, called me a traitor, a bitter childless woman who did not understand how hard it is. She told me I had no heart, that I was selfish, that neighbors are supposed to help each other. She threw every insult she could manage, circling around the same theme. I was the villain because I had not accepted the unspoken duty she had tried to dump on me. I stood there listening to her rant until she finally paused for breath. I told her calmly, deliberately, that what she was doing was not just inappropriate, it was dangerous. I said I would not be an accomplice to her neglect, not by silence and certainly not by passive participation. I told her I was sorry it came to this, but she had pushed every boundary and ignored every warning. She didn't respond, just stormed off. It's been a week, 7 quiet, oddly tense days since Child Protective Services pulled into Dana's driveway and set off a chain of events that none of us saw coming but some of us clearly suspected were inevitable. She hasn't spoken to me since, not a text, not a glare, not a single shouted insult from across the fence. At first, I assumed it was the silence of someone regrouping, planning her next manipulative move. But it turns out silence had a far more devastating reason behind it. I found out the full story from Karen, the neighborhood's unofficial communications director. She's in her late 60s, keeps binoculars on her windowsill for bird watching, and has a talent for accidentally knowing everyone's business. Normally, I avoid her like the HOA newsletter, but when she waved me down at my mailbox, I stopped. I had a feeling I needed to hear what she had to say. She didn't waste time. She told me CPS had returned to Dana's house just 2 days after their initial visit. It was supposed to be a routine follow-up, the kind where they check in, make sure the home is safe, ensure the parent understands the severity of the warning. Except when they knocked on the door, no one answered. The house was locked from the outside, but they could hear noise inside, children's voices, cartoons playing at high volume. Eventually, with law enforcement assistance, they gained entry. Dana wasn't home. In fact, she hadn't been home since the previous night. She had apparently gone to a friend's place, possibly a new boyfriend from what Karen heard, and left Lucas and Mia alone with a tablet, some snacks, and a locked front door. That was all, no adult, no check-ins, no contact, just 2 small children unattended, fending for themselves for at least 14 hours. The CPS report called it egregious neglect. The kids were temporarily removed that same afternoon and placed in emergency foster care, pending further investigation. When I heard that, I stood there, mail forgotten in my hand, staring at Karen like she had just told me a tornado had hit our street. I won't lie, I felt awful, not because I had reported Dana, not for a single second, but because Lucas and Mia didn't deserve that. They deserved better. Lucas, who had once shown me a rock he thought looked like a dinosaur tooth. Mia, who ran in circles every time she saw butterflies in my garden, shrieking with joy. They were sweet kids, chaotic, unsupervised, and starved for attention, but they weren't the problem, they were symptoms of it. And then Karen dropped the second bomb. Apparently, Dana had not only been telling people that I had offered to watch her children but that I had volunteered because I was desperate for kids and jealous of her life. She told anyone who would listen that I was lonely, bitter, and sabotaged her out of envy, that I had gone behind her back to hurt her for attention, that she was blindsided, that I was cruel. I was stunned, not because I expected honesty from her but because I didn't realize how deeply she would twist the narrative. Karen said the story had made its way to nearly every house within shouting distance, and while some neighbors apparently bought into it at first, especially the ones who only saw 2 sides, the mother and the snitch it didn't hold up under scrutiny. Because as it turns out, I wasn't the first neighbor Dana had taken advantage of. Janet, a quiet widow who lives 3 houses down, spoke up next. She told Karen that last year, Dana used to send the kids into her yard constantly. They would show up with no warning, no shoes, and no supervision. Janet would come outside and find them splashing in her bird bath or pulling flowers out of her rose garden. At first, she tolerated it, she even offered juice boxes and chalk. But then it became daily, then expected, then demanding. When Janet finally told Dana it had to stop, Dana accused her of being unfriendly, of hating children, of having too much free time to understand a working mother's struggle. Janet put up a no trespassing sign the next day and installed motion sensors. Dana retaliated by letting the kids play loudly in front of her house every evening for a week straight. And it didn't stop with Janet. According to Karen, Dana had a pattern. She would target the most accessible woman on the block, especially if that woman lived alone, and gradually escalate the asks. First, it was just for a few minutes, then just while I run an errand, then you're home anyway. If the neighbor allowed it, she'd push further. If the neighbor resisted, she'd guilt them. And if the neighbor finally said no, that's when the character assassination would begin. Suddenly, that neighbor was heartless, mean-spirited, jealous, or prejudiced. Dana's stories adapted to whatever narrative she needed to preserve her own image as the struggling, innocent mother doing her best. The problem was, none of the other women took it as far as I did. They complained to friends, they gossiped, they drew boundaries, but they didn't file reports, they didn't collect proof, they didn't document timestamps and screenshots and video clips, they didn't press back with actual action. That was the difference. And once word got out about what had actually happened, once CPS removed the children and the real story started unraveling, Dana's version of events began to collapse.